My name is Misty Dragano. I'm the Senior Vice President of Media Relations at First Degree. We are proudly one of the more company agencies that really focuses in on providing marketing, media relations, and influencer marketing services to the nonprofit sector. I am joined today by Diane Parisi, who is Vice President of our Business Development team, and Mac McKeever, who is all things media relations, as well as has been really instrumental in helping bring influencer marketing to the First Degree products and services, as well as to several of our nonprofit clients. So with that, I will, excuse me, didn't mean to have that pop up there. Diane and Nick are gonna kind of monitor chats, and I really want this to be a interactive conversation. So if you have any questions, go ahead and just put them in the chat. I will pause at sometimes throughout the presentation just to make sure that we're able to allow people to have some dialogue through this. So let's go ahead and get started. And before we dive into where we are in today's world of influencer marketing, I'm going to start with a smidge of a history lesson and talk a little bit about just the economies and how we have grown and shaped over the years. So for millennia, we were an industrial/agricultural economy. People made products and services that people needed, and we bought products and services that were needed to sustain our communities, to thrive and survive. And that goes as far back as you can think. Even for those of you my age have recognized the Little House on the Prairie and how our farmers would go into the store and sell their products to then their own customers. And in that agricultural and industrial economy, there's always a middleman that helped get products from point A to point B. Then comes the 1950s, where we move into an age of consumerism. So you still have industry, you still have buying and selling of products and services for need, but then you layer on top of that buying and selling services for want. And so you had in the 50s, you had young adults coming back from World War II who had more spending power than ever before. They were starting families, they were buying homes, cities were brewing, suburbs were growing. And so we moved into this age of consumerism that is really carried forward into where we are today. Fast forward to the 2000s, and then you lay on top of that yet another economic engine, which is the knowledge economy, where data is king. And the more data you have, the more ability you have as an individual or as a business to grow, to sell products and services, to create out of nothing new businesses. This is what grew and created beyond the birth of Google and Facebook and day trading, and you think about how technology really drove the next level of our economic growth. And then comes Web 2.0 and more technology that all of a sudden you have a supercomputer in your hand. And we've moved now into what's called the creator economy, where individuals like you and me and your spouses and your children can create content, and not only create content, but turn that into a viable revenue stream, whether they're talking about their life hacks or dancing on TikTok or selling products on Etsy. It is all about creating content now and putting that into the hands of individuals who want it and desire it and want to interact with it. And that middleman from the economics of the industrial age is really dissipating. So publishers are not as a necessity. If you wanted to write your own book, you can just e-publish it yourself. If you're an artist, you can paint and you can sell an NFT of your art. If you are a musician, you create your music and you put it on YouTube. You don't need that distribution kind of bottleneck anymore. And along with this, not only are there the apps and the technology that create this creator economy, but there's even more apps and technologies that help creators create that content. And so that is what has brought us to where we are today. But let's be honest, not every creator and content creator is an influencer. Influencers are individuals that have the power through their content to affect change. They can drive sales, they impact and change behavior. And corporate America has known this for the past couple of years. They have really transformed this cottage industry of engaging influencers to build brand loyalty and sell products from, a small industry 6-7 years ago to a 14 billion, and I say that with a B, dollar industry, to the point where influencer marketing is now a key component of nearly every large brand that you can think of, their sales and product and marketing mix. So Amazon influencers, I think, is one of the ones that is most well known. They have an estimated 20,000 influencers on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, you name it, who they pay small commissions for sales. So it's the face-to-face marketing of the internet. It's the digital direct sales of as seen on TV now on the web. And this is where an influencer who might have, built a following, a small following, 20, 30, 50,000 people, talking about how they're getting through life with their kids, who now all of a sudden are talking and interspersing in that content great hacks on how to save time, energy, and they're selling them for them.
I think the big takeaway here too, Misty, is that it's not just the traditional media outlets and the journalists that wield the power of persuasion. We've kind of migrated, and the authentic, the blogger and the Twitter user and the TikTok celebrity now is the voice of authority in a lot of our decision making and where we obtain our information.
Absolutely. Thank you, Diane, for adding that in. And it's not just to sell products. To that point, the influence of building buzz is something that we're used to offline. We're used to celebrities, TV and radio or TV and movie stars wearing the latest fashions with the goal of it being photographed and seen on the red carpet. But now you have hundreds of thousands of influencers who are the fashion icons in their own little network of celebrity influence. So this is a good example of Kenneth Cole. They launched their entire fall line, not by engaging with those well-known celebrities, but by engaging with influencers. And in the course of a few short weeks, they had millions and millions of views of their new fall product line. They saw traffic to their website grow, and they saw ultimately sales come out of it as well. But it really, their focus was building that buzz and that excitement. And so, this just kind of pulls together a few of the points that Diana and I were just talking about. This has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. It is, where the new celebrities are, and it is that authentic, interesting content that these individuals create, that we as individuals follow, and we tend to mirror their content. We like what they're doing. We follow their recommendations. We don't like the things that they don't like. From a marketing perspective, since we're all marketers, I had to look at influencers as this kind of combination of the storyteller, the production studio, and the media outlet all rolled into one now. So instead of building your stories over here, producing this high quality HD content, and then putting it on television, influencers give you the opportunity to tell your story, let them produce the content for you in a little bit more authentic, kind of natural way, and then distribute it for you to their followers. So as marketers, we all want to know, does this work? Does this really, really work? And so I put a couple statistics here from the State of Influencer Marketing Benchmark Report. They've been doing this for several years. This is a survey that asks predominantly on the for-profit side, but marketers who have used influencers to get a sense of the success and what success are they seeing. So professionals will tell you that the influencers that they engage with are highly effective at delivering on the goals that they set out. But what I thought was really interesting was the number here in the middle. They're not just effective, but they are bringing in a higher quality of customer. And I think that harkens back to what Diane said, which is influencers speak with authority and authenticity, and they are the source of information that we go to learn, to grow, to figure out what we're going to do. I'll give you a good statistic. Another one that I just kind of happened to see. I was looking at TV ratings, 2021. And if you look at the ratings that have declined, you can see a direct correlation to the growth in that type of content now through influencers, cooking channel, home and garden TV, DIY channels. Those impressions and those viewerships are declining a little bit. They're still very robust, don't get me wrong. But what you're seeing is that I don't have to sit down and watch 6 episodes of HGTV anymore to figure out what I'm going to do at my bathroom. I can go and just look on Pinterest, and I can look at a couple followers and get some amazing ideas very quickly on my own time by people that I think I trust their opinion or I like their style.
And from, just to add an element for our friends from the nonprofit space on here, a couple of interesting tidbits that I ran across. Really, so 78% of nonprofits already tout social media as their top marketing channel. So from perspective of social influencers, this is just a natural evolution of how you're going to promote and advertise your brand. Another big, I think, component is that we know, especially in our daily lives, our personal lives, that a trusted recommendation is, somebody that you know and you trust, a friend or family member that asks you to do something, you're more inclined to do that. What we just heard was almost half of consumer survey respondents said that they gave unexpectedly to a charity because a friend or a family member asked them to, or in this case, a social influencer, because a social influencer is that trusted source. So people rely heavily on what they say and obviously follow them. Any calls to action, certainly they have the influence to persuade you.
Yeah. I'm going to pause there, Nick, or those of you who are mounting the chat. Are there any questions just about where we've been and kind of the state of the union on influencers from a for-profit perspective? Because I want to turn now and talk about how it can be leveraged in the nonprofit space and kind of the process that you would go through if you were to choose to go down this path.
Nothing yet, but feel free to shout out any questions you have as you have them.
All righty. All right. Well, then I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Mac, and talk about how this really is the time for the nonprofits to engage in influencers. So Mac, you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, so, we find this Gifluential platform as social influencers as kind of a wildly untapped resource. And we know that nonprofits these days must find new and interesting ways to gauge with, Generation X and millennials, where they are today. And where they are today is, online and in social media. Now, Misty talked about how for-profit brands have built a huge cottage industry and processes and tools and best practices to engage with these social influencers. The social influencer marketing concept is going to help, enhance your brand exposure and improve your brand recognitions. Now, nonprofits are just starting to see this, as a viable tool and brand building channel. And really, there aren't many folks really doing it out there in the nonprofit sector. So it means there's incredible opportunity for nonprofits to really begin to use this. They can use it as a brand awareness building tool, which is great. What that does is it kind of primes the pump for raising the brand awareness about an organization, its causes, for when it, for that time when they are become viable donors. And through social influencers too, because the universe of social influencers, so many of them out there. And a lot of these social influencers deal in very specific areas, such as, sustainable living, or perhaps it's fly fishing, or even growing plants, and so on and so forth. So their followers obviously want to follow content that resonates with them, as, whatever that may be. Aligning with social influencers using some of these tools, you can get hyper targeted with regard to finding influencers that, have causes that are near and dear to their hearts, that mirror the values and the mission of your nonprofit organization. And once they become kind of allies with you, and once you find that alignment, that's when you really ring the bell. And that allows you to improve your credibility and your trust, and to revamp, your content and those kinds of things too. I think social influencers really gives the nonprofits the ability to be at the forefront of tapping into this new way to build brand awareness and tap into people's emotions. As we discussed earlier, private companies and brands have been using social influencer very successfully. But what nonprofits do, obviously, is they have causes and missions that people can identify with emotionally and personally. And I think that also just does so much more to augment the authenticity of these. In other words, companies have been using these influencers with great efficacy to push products, which are often hard to get personal and emotional about. But what we're talking about is raising awareness about important issues that people feel passionately about. And through this, we can find the most optimal influencers who speak to those followers with the messages that will best resonate with them. Yes, it's a platform. I'm sorry, go ahead, Misty.
Oh, no, I was going to say, and I'll add to that. I think just to kind of circle back, the one thing that I wanted to hone in on that you said, which is we hear from nonprofits all the time. How do I start engaging millennials? How do I start priming the pump with Gen Xers who are starting to get into that more traditional donor profile? Thing is, this is where they are today, and you can't assume that as they age into your donor file, they're going to now transition into those more historically kind of viable, successful direct response channels. So, 10 years from now, I don't know where a millennial is going to be. I don't know how a millennial is going to really engage with a nonprofit. It probably doesn't exist today. So the goal here is to use the channels to get in front of them, start talking to them, building that awareness where they are today, and then continue to, follow them, and they'll follow you along that journey to being that kind of 50 plus traditional donor. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you nailed it. It's an innovative solution that kind of solves a challenging kind of ongoing problem for a lot of nonprofit organizations. And that is, how do we, speak to our current donors and our loyal fans and followers, but how do we target that new up and coming emerging donor? The other great thing about this too, is it can augment existing marketing efforts too, like direct mail and television and all those other things. It augments them and gives you the ability to maintain continuity and consistency. It just gives you a whole new medium to be able to get the word out about your message and your mission.
Yeah. All right. So then next, and I'll let you talk a little bit about this, because we get this question all the time. Well, which influencers are we going to use? So Mac, do you want to kind of talk a little bit about this in the next two slides?
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a nomenclature education on how influencers are broken down. So they're broken down by mega influencers, which are like huge celebrities, the Kardashian types. They have over 1 million followers. And then of course there's macro influencers. So that's 100,000 to 1 million followers. Micro influencers, 10,000 to 100,000 followers. And then your nano influencers. Through our research, what we found something very, very interesting is the higher the reach, the engagement actually goes down. Engagement meaning the number of likes and comments and the ways with which their followers are actually interacting with the influencers themselves. And when it comes to engaging social influencers for a campaign or whatnot, the cost obviously goes up with the reach. What's really interesting though is the higher engagement coincides directly with the number of followers. So the fewer followers, obviously the higher engagement. So what this does is this concept gives folks who engage in social influencer campaigns incredible versatility. Do you want to reach a lot of people really quickly? Then you would go with a mega influencer. Or do you want to get your message out with a higher engagement rate, but maybe not quite as widespread, and everything in between? The key here is it offers incredible versatility. A campaign with a social influencer could look like maybe a handful of micro and nano influencers, but it could also be supplemented with a mega influencer campaign too. So the versatility is also pretty cool as well.
Okay, Nick, I'm just doing a check-in. Any questions? No?
None that I've seen from the group.
Sure.
Well, you guys are quiet today. I guess that's because the post-lunch lull. So yeah, so this can be a daunting process in terms of, and we get this question all the time, how do you do this? And listen, we know that there are several nonprofits have like a couple folks that are big influencers that have a really personal connection with that organization and have done some amazing things. I know, American Heart Association, for example, works very closely with an influencer who's raised millions of dollars. He has a personal connection because he's had heart disease, he's had surgery, and he really, he's doing it because this is his way of giving back. What we're talking about is kind of flipping the switch a little bit, which is designing campaigns and proactively finding influencers to be part of your voice in this channel. So I'm going to let Matt just kind of high level walk through the process of how you would go about engaging and building out an influencer campaign.
Right, and that's a good point you mentioned earlier too. A lot of organizations that I've talked to, they have tried social media and they've tried social influencer campaigns, but usually it's something that they do on a grassroots level, something that maybe their marketing communications manager says, hey, let's get into social influencing. And, so maybe they'll find people that have alignment with their mission or what have you. What we're talking about here is a really structured, concerted, focused effort. And it starts really with the campaign design. So what are your objectives? Where do you want to be, where do you want to be, next year or the year after, where you're not currently? What mission do you want to get out there? What objectives do you want to accomplish? And who is best to receive those messages? So it starts with the design of the overall campaign. So what are the objectives? What are the goals? And the objectives and goals will then drive the strategy, the tactics, the planning, and so on and so forth. Once we have a good beat on that, the very next logical step would be, okay, so we know what we want to do. Who are the influencers that we can find that can best be the vectors for those messages, for that mission, and so on and so forth? And then we have this platform where we can, really, really be hyper targeted with regard to the influencers that will best deliver, those objectives and those goals and strategies. Remember, the universe of social influencers is huge. And as I had said previously too, there's interest all over the place with regards to what these influencers are stand for or behind and talk about. And as a result, that's why they have their followers, because they have those shared interests. So we get hyper targeted with finding these influencers, but it takes a lot of time to find these folks, to vet them, to make sure that they're going to, be able to carry that message the most optimal, effective way possible. And then once we have those identified, then we actually reach out to them, work out the contract negotiations, the agreements, work with them on brand guidelines. For instance, a lot of brands obviously have their own unique nuances that they want to make sure get across in concert with the content that we want to develop specific to accomplishing those goals and those objectives. And then we actually do the campaign execution.
And Matt,
I'm going to pause you. Go ahead, Nick.
We have a couple of questions from the audience.
Oh, sure.
Related to selecting your influence. The first one is that when you're looking at that, do you want to select influencers from all levels, or do you want to say, I'm doing a macro influencer, a micro, or a mini influencer campaign?
I think that's a really good question. And, it really comes down to what the objectives are. When you establish the objectives, are you looking for a longer sustained campaign that you want to raise the level of awareness over a little bit of time? Or are you looking for a quick hit? Maybe it's around an event, so on and so forth, where you might want somebody with a much larger reach with a lot more followers. So it really depends on the objectives of the campaign. And but that's the beauty of the universe of macro and nano influencers and everywhere in between, is you can also develop an influencer roster, a campaign that combines all of those too.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, let me add on that one, Nick, just for a second. So perfect example, we're working with a client right now, and the sweet spot that we wanted to target was kind of that mid-tier, the 100,000 or 50,000 to 150,000. So micro nano type influencers. But that being said, we found a couple influencers that their content was spot on with what we were trying to convey. So we added them into the mix to get that balance of really strong content relation to what we were trying to communicate to a very broad audience. And what was nice about them is they weren't that expensive. So it was a good opportunity. And that's part of this process that we go through that's in these little orange areas. There's a lot of back and forth and thinking about, like Max said, who are the right influencers for this particular campaign? How much are they charging and what's your budget? That is a big component of it too, because if you are wanting to put a small amount of money behind the media buy component of this, then we got to be really strategic with mapping that back to the goals. If you're going for a much bigger campaign, then there's room to kind of size it accordingly.
And a
To add
related,
on to that, oh, I'm sorry, Nick, go ahead.
I was going to go to the next question, so go ahead, Mac.
Sure.
I was going to add on to that, you know, through the influencer identification, you may have a budget in mind. And let's say we picked 5 influencers that we think fit the budget and hit the right notes. And then we discover, let's say, a mega influencer, and the content, just to underscore what Misty said, let's say the content is spot on and there's acute brand alignment. And when you're looking at the posts this person makes and their engagement rate and some of those metrics, then you might want to shift gears and go with that person. So instead of, you know, 5 smaller influencers in terms of number of followers, you know, you might find somebody through the research and vetting process that just hits all of the right notes, and then you would go there. So a lot of it is metrics driven, but also getting a sense and feel for looking at the flavor and nature of who these influencers are through their posts and on their pages to say, yeah, this is the person that we think would really ring the bell.
And in that Kenneth Cole example that you talked about, what strata of influencers do you think that they focused on?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I saw that pop up. So we don't know, but my gut tells me, because they wanted to make a big blast fast. And when you look at the results that they touted, it was broad reach. So it looks like they engaged a couple mega influencers, but then they really honed in on that second tier, kind of that a 500,000 to 1 million influencers that all they did was talk about fashion. So it really was more of a focus, from what I think, is on making sure that the content was really aligned. And they kind of kept it at that upper end of the scale for this one. And then David, I see you also had a question about staffing. That's the tricky part of this. So as we've built this process out for some of our clients, there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes work that goes into this. I mean, your teams are obviously designing campaigns all the time, and this really isn't just a campaign designed specifically for influencers. We always talk about, it's a campaign that can also be activated across your entire digital experience. Where the time and effort comes in is in this orange spot. Again, you're going to need somebody dedicated to really understanding the influencer platforms, really understanding and researching the influencers that meet the criteria that you're looking for. There's a lot of email communications back and forth, contract negotiations that go into that piece. We even built in, from an execution perspective, we have collaborator calls with our influencers once they've signed on to say, yes, I'm going to participate in this campaign. So that's part of why we built, and I'm not trying to kind of proactively sell anything here, but we've built an entire process around this internally at First Degree, because we know that our clients might not have the internal infrastructure to do that. And we've built out the influencer relationship management system so that, like, I could tap into, you tell me you want influencers who talk about cooking hacks and they have 50,000 followers or more and they get an engagement rate of 3%. We've built out the infrastructure and the technology to be able to go quickly find them and then start those dialogues with them. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
And then to that idea of vetting your influencers, we have a couple of related questions. Can you talk a little bit about the process of vetting influencers that you haven't worked with yet to make sure that they're legitimate? And then how do you maintain creative control going in there? Or is that something that's just covered by the vetting process?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that one, and then Matt kind of chime in. So how do we vet and research the influencers? So I sort of touched base on that. We start very broadly. and search for influencers that are talking about the kind of content that we think would be relevant to what we're asking them to communicate and meets the types of engagement rates that we're looking for in this campaign. From there, we will then start vetting them. We can look and see what other brands have worked with them. So I might get a list of 500 influencers that meet this kind of initial campaign kind of criteria. Then we're going to sit down and we're going to look at them and go, you know what? Amazon and Walmart and blah, blah, blah has worked with them, and they get really high engagement rates on their paid posts. So we'll go through and really scrub that from a data-driven perspective to answer the first question, which is, are they going to perform for us? Are they going to deliver? Do they have the right types of audiences that we're going to reach? The second vetting is really where you really have to kind of think through, are they true to your brand? Do you want to be associated with them? And that means you got to go and you got to look at their posts. You can't just look at the last couple yesterday and the last day before. You got to sit down and scroll through them, and that takes some time. And I'll give you a perfect example. We found someone who was fantastic for a campaign, great content, great engagement rates, great other brands that she worked with. But then as we started to dig into some of the posts, we're like, this is a children's charity. Some of this content that's absolutely unrelated to what we would be asking them to do just doesn't quite fit with this organization's brand. So we took them off the list. And then last but not least, once you kind of come down to that list, it is really put into the hands of the nonprofit. When we're managing it with an agency, and you're going to have to make some gut calls. You're going to really want to make sure that looking at their posts, reading their comments, that you feel that you've got a good fit. The second question then was on creative control. So when we built our processes for managing influencers, we build in creative control mechanisms. So when we contract with the influencer, we specify exactly what we're asking them to do. 2 Instagram posts and an Instagram reel. These are the kind of things that we want you to talk about, the messages. Here are the hashtags that you are to use, the tags, all that kind of content. We'll even prescribe that they put a specific link in their bios for a specific amount of time. And then they have to submit through our process the content. They got to make it, and they got to submit it, and they can't post it until we sign off on it and approve it. Now, I can't tell them exactly what to do because, again, you want that authenticity. So you can't prescribe exactly how they take and create that content, but you do have some checks and balances on the front end and on the back end to make sure that it's true to your brand.
The other thing too is these influencers, I mean, this is a revenue stream for them. So like Misty said, we want to make sure to maintain that authenticity and credibility, letting them do their thing within the guidelines that we put forth. We found it works out really, really well. But really, when it comes right down to it, influencers, this is money in their pockets, so they want to make sure that they're satisfying our requirements. Yet at the same time, maintaining their autonomy with their followers and making sure that they're delivering the content that their followers come to expect from these influencers. We want to make sure to maintain that genuine authenticity.
And I think that's the big difference between ambassadors and social influencers. Lots of nonprofits have ambassadors that are doing good things because they like the charity or they have an affinity towards the charity. Social influencers are doing it because they may have an affinity towards the charity, but it's also a job for them. And there are back-end metrics that we can literally hold them accountable to. So that is the big distinction between the two. And I think there's room for all of them. But this one certainly social influencer marketing certainly has a lot more accountability.
Yeah, and I just want to, I think we've said it, but we haven't really said it. You are paying the influencer to create and distribute your content. So this is not they're doing it because they like you. This is you're hiring them, just like you would hire individuals in a face-to-face program to go out and talk about your nonprofit and to generate sustainer donors. So it is a contractual relationship, and we feel that it's really important to map out everything you're expecting from them and to build those processes in place where you have the review opportunities and approval process.
Yeah, we like to say instead of buying media, you're buying influence. That's exactly what you're doing.
So,
Nick, any other questions? Yeah.
yes, looking at the process that you see here on this slide, what is the typical timeline for something like this? And when you get to the end, what are the KPIs and metrics that you should be aiming for?
Yeah, absolutely. So the second question leads right into my next slide. So from a timeline perspective, we really suggest having at least 6 to 8 weeks from campaign design to launch, because you've got to spend the time to find the right influencers. We've got to reach out to them, get them excited. We've got to spend time going back and forth on price and the negotiation piece. That kind of piece can also be happening while you're building out the campaign tools and things like that. But at minimum 6 to 8 weeks. I think 6 weeks is kind of pushing it, to be honest with you. In terms of KPIs, I will move on to our next slide, because this is very KPI driven. And, the campaigns really start with that top of the funnel. This is creating awareness and then pulling them into your other existing digital kind of acquisition and fundraising channels for ultimate giving. So we measure some of the first campaigns by reach and awareness, engagement. I've talked a lot about how we vet influencers based on what their average engagement rates are, what their average number of likes and shares are, comments, and then we look back and make sure that this campaign performed as expected or above. And then you start, as these campaigns continue to move on, we'll start moving down into creating campaigns that might ask people to go to the website to learn more. So influencers talking about ways to reduce food waste, and then we're saying go here to this particular page and get more tips. So that's starting to drive that traffic, which then your digital acquisition tools such as retargeting and things like that can start to pull them down into your fundraising channels. All right, any other questions, Nick, or we'll kind of move on with some of the other?
Couple of cost questions that folks are asking. What percentage of a marketing budget should be set aside for influencer marketing using some of the metrics that you see from the for-profit world? And then what the average cost at each level of influencer that you're generally seeing?
Okay. Percentage of budget, that's a real hard question to answer. I would say if you're not doing it now, you should allocate some budget, some of your marketing and brand awareness budget to start it, because the first couple of campaigns, you're really gonna be figuring out who are the right types of influencers for your organization and starting to create those benchmarks. I kind of think I liken it to, the days of Facebook when we were all trying to figure out how to make money on Facebook. So you're optimizing your ad spend and deciding which posts work well and which ones didn't, and which ones, when you boosted, got more exposure. So the first couple of campaigns of your influencer marketing strategy really should be kind of approached with that mindset. And that's what we're doing with several of our clients right now. What was the second part of the question, Nick?
The average cost of each level of influencer.
Thank you. So it depends. I mean, we're seeing that the kind of lower tiers, the nanos and the micros, in that couple $100 to $1,500 per campaign price point. And then it just goes upward from there. We've got a couple folks that have several million followers on TikTok, and they're not really asking much more than that. We've seen some influencers who have, a couple $1 million in influence or followers, but they're asking a lot more than that. And so, if you were to, what we would do is sit down with you and really kind of figure out, what's that first pilot investment you'd want to make? And from that would really give us a good sense of how the different influencers perform with your messaging, and then kind of build out a 12-month strategy based on the pilot.
And a question related to that type of performance, if you have someone who's successful in a campaign, do you use that same person for a future campaign with the same organization? Or do you have a list that you're going in that you would want to use, generally speaking?
Yeah, so in general, I mean, we look at we personally don't, First Degree doesn't have a list of influencers that we would use for all of our clients. And I think that's where some others are. And don't get me wrong, there's some folks that have, they have their finger on the pulse of military spouses. And so if you've got a campaign that you want to, they'd be great because they know them and they work with, but it's the same group of people. What we do is we've got the universe of influencers and we identify the ones based on the campaign and your audiences that you're trying to reach. That being said, yeah, once you've got some influencers that are working for you, you definitely would want to continue to invite them to participate in your future campaigns. And that's going to be a conversation that you have with them. You got to think of it this way too. They're managing their own brand. So they're not going to jump and, just always talk about you all the time because it's going to completely change their brand. So they're going to have that balance of how much they want to weave the social good into their kitchen hacks. So there's definitely this kind of negotiation and compromise that goes on a campaign by campaign basis. I think I answered that question. Is there anything else, Mac, to add, or Diane?
You did a fine job.
Excellent.
And you were talking about cost a little bit ago, kind of like folks talk about media spend in other channels. And so we have a question here asking about the difference between putting paid spend into a post to have an influencer post it via their account handle versus using their content and running a paid ad on your own owned digital network. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it really kind of depends on what you're trying to accomplish. The value of paying them to create the content and share it through their networks is those are individuals that you don't have a dialogue with yet today. So it really is about building broad awareness and reach and ultimately engagement with new audiences. Taking their content then that they've created and then sharing it within your own social platforms and doing boosts. Yes, that will work or could work, but you're losing that authentic voice. And that kind of goes back to what we talked about in the very beginning. The reason these are influencers is because people have chosen to follow them because they like what they have to say and they trust what they have to say. And the minute you take that content out of that one-to-many, but yet one-to-one personal conversation that the influencer has with their followers, you lose a little bit of that authenticity, in my opinion. Anything else?
Looking at the way that you would assess influencers, are you looking at the number of followers that they have in their preferred channel or across all channels?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we typically look at both. Some campaigns we design specifically for a platform. So if we're designing a campaign specifically for Instagram, then we clearly want to know and we'll evaluate them based on that. But if we also see that they have reach in other platforms, we will consider that as well. Some campaigns we've designed that, we're looking for 10 Instagrammers and 10 TikTokers. And so they don't have to be mutually exclusive. As we're doing our research, if we see that there's somebody that's got just great engagement and reach on both of those platforms, well then let's add them to the mix. So again, and I hate to keep going back to this, but a lot of this really depends. It kind of goes all back to what's the goal, what's the message you're trying to communicate, and who's the influencer that is authentic with that message and is reaching the right audience that you're trying to reach. It's that kind of thought process that has to go into every kind of component of this.
And speaking of that authenticity, we have a question about whether influencers disclose that they're being paid for the post.
It's a great question. So like I said, this has grown from a cottage industry of just like the wild, wild west to now there are standards and practices that the platforms themselves have put into place. So yes, you will see, and we will require that they mention that it is a paid post. And if you're on TikTok or Instagram, like I now am because I have a 15-year-old, you'll start to see those, and you can kind of see which ones are the paid ones versus which ones are just them being organic. And they try to, again, the influencers are building their own business or building their own brands. They don't want to be, they want to be transparent, and you want to be transparent as well. So you should always require them to make those kind of posts, tag things that are paid sponsorships.
Okay.
All right.
We also have a question about damage control. Should the campaign backfire, how do you pivot and control the narrative?
Oh, there's a whole conversation about crisis communications right there.
In our crisis communications webinar will be.
Yeah, we'll talk about that one on
that.
No, I don't mean to be to light. Listen, that is always a risk of, any social post that you make, any comment you make, any kind of Facebook ad you put out there, people can comment, and you've got to kind of monitor that and be proactive in making sure that you have the right strategies and tactics to respond to it effectively and thoughtfully. That is why we try to do as much on the front end to control that by requiring all influencers to submit their content prior. We sign off on it. We have documentation that says we've signed off on it, and it gets posted. And they don't get paid if they don't follow through. So, we try to put as many checks and balances in that as possible, but you absolutely have to have your social media monitoring process in place, just like you would do for any other social media that you engage in. This is just another channel, another way of doing it.
Yeah, the vetting process, like you said, is paramount, and you check a lot of boxes when you do that, in addition to making sure that nothing is going to go off the rails or someone's going to go rogue. But yeah, to reiterate, how you would handle that would be, hopefully you have a crisis plan in place to handle any sort of communications issue or fallout that you would need to deal with, whether it comes from the media or social media or any. So it would be handled the same. Sure, there's nuances to social media that have to be handled deftly and somewhat differently, but yeah, any organization should have a solid crisis communications plan in place for sure.
All right. Any other questions, Nick?
I think we can go ahead.
All right. So okay, great. I think we're perfectly on time. So we've talked a lot about this. Let's just think about, what does this really look like and how are nonprofits using it? So this gives you a little bit of a sample of how we look and find influencers. So we'll start, depending on the campaign. This is an example. We said, okay, we want women who are young at hearts. They are, over 40, but, are kind of young at heart in the way they engage with social media. This is one of the influencers that would fall into that category. And you can see a little bit of the type of information that we look at. We know that Urban Outfitters worked with her. We know that Levi's has worked with her. We know that she has 16,000 average likes. We know that she's got a lot of engagement. So we'll go out then and find more of hers. For this particular campaign that we were working on, they wanted to tap into successful families. All right, so here, Christine Cooper, she's a curator of content. She talks all about family, travel. We know that she's an Amazon influencer. She also works with Athleta. So you get a sense of, based on this profile, what a successful family's influencer would look like. And then this is another one. They wanted they wanted the successful woman, a little bit older, a little bit higher income, kind of runs her own business, entrepreneurial type woman. So this, again, every campaign, we will sit down and build out a persona of what the type of influencers I take that back. Not the influencers. These are the types of audiences that we want to reach. And so therefore we are looking for influencers that are reaching those types of audiences based on their content. All right, so I'm just going to wrap it up with a couple examples of how we've seen some nonprofits and how this worked out. I love this story because this one's sort of organic. There really wasn't a nonprofit that drove it, but is a great example how viral and quick these things can take off. So podcaster Carlos Whitaker was in the Atlanta airport and he saw the Piano Man playing, who had a little tip jar on there that said he was, asked for tips because he was in need of a kidney transplant. Carlos got to talk to him, thought it was just a great story. While he's a podcaster, he's got several 100,000 followers on Instagram. So this goes back to that, like, understanding that they really aren't always in just one medium. And within 30 minutes, he put out a post asking for his fans to Cash App or Venmo a tip. And within 30 minutes, he walked up and gave him $10,000. That grew to $61,000 by the end of the day. So it's just a great example, again, how his followers, and because they loved him and who he was for whatever content, I don't even know what he talks about on his podcast, to be honest with you, but there was that connection that his fans and followers had with him. And when he said, you know what, I need you to help me help him, they rose to the occasion. This one is TikTok, another example on TikTok. He's more of a mega influencer. Charlie Rock went through a life transformation of losing hundreds of pounds, then became a motivational speaker and got really involved. He kind of documented that transformation on TikTok and has, millions of loyal fans. And then he started this Dream Machine Foundation where he just drives around and does good. And this is an example. He was pulled up to Starbucks, asked the Starbucks barista. Somehow they got talking about what she does outside of there. She's an artist. And he turned around and got up and said, well, what's your most you've sold your paintings for? And she's like, oh, about $100. And he handed her $400 and said, I'll be back tomorrow to get a painting. So just, again, his fans were like, loved it. He now has this own foundation where his fans will follow his stories, continue to give and support the actions that he does. And this one, I think, fits more in with some of the kind of campaigns that we're seeing too with our nonprofit clients. So Mila Johnson, she is known on YouTube for her best deals. She works with Amazon. She works with the tourism industry, a lot of players in the tourism industry, Disney, you name it. She talks about like the best time to travel and how to do it. Again, she was inspired by a nonprofit that was in her local community that was trying to get meals for kids, meal kits for kids in need so that they could have food not only at lunch at schools, but back home. And through her just loyal fans, she raised $30,000 in 24 hours. So these are just a couple very quick examples of how that trust and that authenticity and that influence that these folks have with their audiences, how quickly that could be capitalized for good. So with that, shameless plug here, we've built out a platform to really do this in the nonprofit industry. We're here to help you, even if it's just, if you have any questions about how all this works, Diane, Mac, and I are available. We're super excited and passionate about how influencers are going to hopefully revolutionize and really grow over the next couple of years in the nonprofit space. And we're just excited to be talking about it and be part of it with you. So I know we have a couple minutes left. If there's any more questions or comments or.
Well, this last part just answered a question we had earlier of, is there such a thing as an influence brokerage house that you use? Glad that we covered that one. This is the brokerage house.
Love that.
So what is your advice for charities that are a little bit more regional? Are there regional influencers that someone could go to?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, because if you think about it, I couldn't tell think about the influencers you may follow. I have no idea where they live. Really don't. And so part of that is, I think it could be a double-edged sword. I think there's definitely opportunities to find influencers that are regional to you, but I think this is the opportunity to engage audiences that may not be local and may not be regional to your area. But again, if you find an influencer who is passionate about your cause and the message of helping some, local kids, or helping local homeless shelters, or helping local animal welfare organizations, there's no reason why you can't tap into that authenticity and work with them. I don't think it's a hindrance if you're regional. I guess my advice would be don't feel like you can only find regional influencers to support you in these causes and these opportunities.
Thank you all very much for your time today. If you do have questions, you have Misty's email and Diane's email and Mac on the call today. Happy to answer any questions that you have by